Thomas Morgan brought down his gavel in courtroom 7 of Westfield County Courthouse. Everyone went quiet at once. He looked across the room with cold eyes that had seen thousands of cases over his 23 years as a judge. Mrs. Bennett, this court finds you guilty of parking violations. Fine of $750, due within 30 days. Emma Bennett stood tall in front of him. She was 34 years old with dark skin, bright eyes, and a quiet strength about her. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a small notebook in her hand. The fine was much too high. Everyone in the courtroom knew normal parking fines were about $150. Your Honor, she began politely. The sign was covered by construction work. I couldn't see. Mrs. Bennett, Thomas cut her off, looking over his glasses. My decision is final. Pay on your way out. The look on his face made it clear there would be no more talking. Emma pressed her lips together and nodded once. As she collected her papers, she watched a white man named Peter Wilson step up next. He had the same violation, parking in a no-parking zone. The judge barely looked at the papers. Mr. Wilson, 75, fine. Next case. Emma's eyes narrowed slightly. She made a quick note on her phone. Day 27, Morgan, $750 versus $75. Then she walked out of the courtroom with her head high. Outside in the hallway, an older woman touched Emma's arm. That wasn't right. What he did in there. No, it wasn't, Emma agreed. But it happens every day. The older woman shook her head. Nothing we can do about it. That's just how things are. Emma smiled. Maybe. Maybe not. What Judge Morgan didn't know was that Emma Bennett wasn't just any person who'd gotten a parking ticket. She was the top investigative journalist for the National Herald. For the past month, she had been coming to his courtroom, sometimes as a visitor, sometimes with minor violations. She watched everything and wrote it all down. That evening, Emma returned to her small flat in the east side of town. The walls of her living room were covered with papers, charts, and photographs. She'd been tracking Judge Morgan's decisions for 27 days now. The pattern was clear. White people got smaller fines and lighter sentences than black people for the same crimes. Emma made herself a cup of tea and sat down at her computer. Her brother James had spent 2 years in prison for something that usually got people just community service. She had promised herself then that someday she would do something about the unfair system. Just one more week, she whispered to herself as she typed up her notes. One more week and we'll have enough proof. Meanwhile, across town in his large brick house, Judge Morgan poured himself a glass of whiskey. He sat in his leather chair, looking at awards on his wall. The local law society had named him Judge of the Year 3 times. He felt proud of his work, never once questioning if he treated everyone the same. His wife walked in and kissed the top of his head. Tough day, dear? The usual, he said. People breaking laws and then making excuses. Well, thank goodness. They have you to set them straight, she said, not knowing what really happened in that courtroom. Emma stayed up late that night, adding her notes to a growing report. She had interviewed 54 people who had been in Judge Morgan's courtroom. She had studied 5 years of court records. The numbers didn't lie. Black people paid more than double what white people paid for the same violations. 312 cases, she mumbled as she worked. That's not just a mistake, that's a pattern. As Emma worked through the night, Judge Morgan slept soundly, unaware that his carefully built reputation was about to come crashing down. Soon, everyone would know what happened behind the doors of courtroom 7, and it would all start with one woman who refused to simply pay her fine and walk away. For nearly a month, Emma had watched Judge Morgan's courtroom. She sat quietly in the back row, sometimes as a visitor, sometimes as someone with a small case of her own. She wrote down everything in her little notebook: who came in, what they were charged with, and what punishment they got. The pattern was clear as day. When white people came before the judge, he would listen to them. He would nod and sometimes even smile. Their fines were lower. Their sentences were shorter. But when black people stood in the same spot, the judge's face would harden. He rarely let them finish speaking. The fines were always higher. Emma walked into the newspaper office early Monday morning. Her boss, Robert, was waiting for her. "Do you have enough?" he asked. Emma placed a thick folder on his desk. "More than enough. 27 days of notes. 5 years of court records. 54 interviews. The numbers don't lie, Robert." Robert opened the folder and let out a low whistle. "This is solid work, Emma. But are you sure you want to put your name on this? Judge Morgan has powerful friends." Emma thought about her brother James, sitting in a prison cell for 2 years while white men who did the same thing walked free. "I'm sure," she said. "The truth needs a face." That evening, Emma went back to her flat and looked at all her work pinned on the walls. Charts showing how black people paid 15% more in fines than white people. Testimonies from people who had faced Judge Morgan. Court records showing clear patterns over 5 years. Her phone rang. It was her mother. "Emma, are you sure about this story? People don't like having their power questioned." "I know, Mum," Emma said. "But if not me, then who?" On the other side of town, Judge Morgan was having dinner with his wife and their friends, another judge and his wife. They laughed and told stories, completely unaware of what was coming. "Thomas just got another excellent review," Mrs. Morgan said proudly. 23 years on the bench and not a single complaint has stuck." The other judge raised his glass. "To Thomas Morgan, the most respected judge in the county." Early the next morning, the newspaper hit the stands with a bold headline. "Different. Justice numbers show racial unfairness in county courts." Emma's name was printed under the headline in black and white for everyone to see. By 9 a.m., the newspaper's website had crashed from too many visitors. By noon, 3 TV stations were outside the courthouse. People began to gather on the steps, some holding signs that said "Equal justice" and "Bias has no place in courts." Judge Morgan arrived at work through the back entrance, as he always did. His clerk, Mary, was waiting with a strange look on her face. "Sir, there's something you should see." She handed him the newspaper. Morgan's face went pale as he read the headline. Then he saw Emma's name. The picture next to the article showed the same woman he had fined just days ago. The woman who had tried to explain about the covered sign. The woman he hadn't bothered to listen to. "Get me my lawyer," he snapped at Mary, throwing the paper down. But as she left the room, he picked it up again and read more carefully. The article was detailed and precise. It showed exactly how many black defendants had been in his courtroom over 5 years. It showed the average fine for white defendants was $120, while for black defendants it was $258 for the same offenses. It showed probation rates, jail sentences, and every other measure. All of them pointed to the same conclusion. Judge Thomas Morgan did not treat everyone equally under the law. That night, after the worst day of his professional life, Judge Morgan couldn't sleep. His wife was asleep beside him, but he got up and went to his study. He found the article online and read the whole thing again. For the first time, he looked at the numbers without defending himself. Could it be true? Had he really been treating people differently without even realizing it? He opened his laptop and began checking his own records, comparing cases that were similar. As the night went on, a sick feeling grew in his stomach. The evidence was right there in his own files. Across town, Emma couldn't sleep either. Her phone hadn't stopped ringing all day. People wanted interviews. People wanted to tell their stories. People were angry, but also hopeful that things might change. Emma looked at a picture of her brother on her desk. "This is just the beginning," she whispered. The story appeared on Monday morning. "Different justice. Numbers show racial unfairness in county courts." Emma's name was printed under the headline. By noon, the courthouse steps were filled with people. Some held signs that said justice should be colorblind and equal treatment now. News vans lined the street, and reporters with microphones waited for anyone coming out of the building. Inside his chambers, Judge Morgan sat with his head in his hands. His phone kept ringing. His lawyer had called 3 times. The head judge of the county wanted to meet with him right away. "Sir," his clerk Mary said from the doorway, "they've canceled your cases for today. The head judge wants you in his office in 15 minutes. Morgan nodded without looking up. He had been a judge for 23 years. People respected him. He had awards on his wall. How could this be happening? Across town, Emma was at the newspaper office. Her desk was covered with notes and her phone wouldn't stop ringing. "The BBC wants to interview you," her boss Robert said. "This story's going national, Emma." Emma smiled, but her stomach was in knots. She knew what going public with this story would mean. Judge Morgan had friends in high places. People would try to find problems with her work. They would dig into her past. "Are you ready for this?" Robert asked, seeing the worry on her face. "I have to be," Emma replied. "The truth is more important than my comfort." Later that afternoon, Emma sat in a TV studio with bright lights in her face. The interviewer was a famous news presenter named William. "Your investigation shows that Judge Morgan gives black people fines that are more than double what white people get for the same offense. How did you discover this pattern?" William asked. "It started with my brother," Emma said. "He got 2 years in prison for something that usually gets people community service. After that, I started watching courtrooms. Judge Morgan's showed the clearest pattern." "And you actually went into his courtroom yourself, correct?" "Yes. I needed to see it firsthand. I got a parking ticket and went before him. He fined me $750 for something that usually costs $150. Then I watched as a white man right after me got a $75 fine for the exact same violation." The interview continued for 20 minutes. Emma explained her methods, the data she collected, and the pattern she found. She was careful not to make it personal. "This isn't about Judge Morgan being a bad person," she said. "It's about patterns we don't see in ourselves. It's about a system that allows this to happen." Meanwhile, Judge Morgan sat in a meeting with the Judicial Review Board. 7 senior judges looked at him with serious faces. "The numbers are concerning, Thomas," said Judge Wilson, the head of the board. "We've had our researchers check Ms. Bennett's findings. They appear to be accurate." "I don't understand how this happened," Morgan said quietly. "I never meant to treat anyone unfairly." "Intent isn't the issue," said Judge Wilson. "Results are what matter, and the results show a clear pattern of different treatment based on race." As Morgan left the meeting, reporters shouted questions at him. He kept his head down and hurried to his car. When he got home, he found more reporters waiting outside his house. That evening, he sat in his living room with the curtains closed. His wife brought him tea. "What will you do?" she asked. Morgan shook his head. "I don't know. My whole career, I thought I was being fair. How could I not see this?" After his wife went to bed, Morgan stayed up late reading through Emma's full report online. He checked some of his own case records. The pattern was undeniable. Black defendants had received harsher punishments than white defendants for the same crimes. For the first time in his life, Judge Morgan felt truly lost. The identity he had built, fair, just, honorable, was falling apart. If he wasn't those things, then who was he? In his study, he found a business card that had been given to him that morning. It had Emma Bennett's name and phone number on it. A court clerk had passed it to him, saying Ms. Bennett had left it in case he wanted to talk. Morgan stared at the card for a long time. Then he picked up his phone and dialed the number. After 3 rings, Emma's voice answered. "Hello? Mrs. Bennett? This is Thomas Morgan. I wonder if we might talk." There was a pause on the line. "Yes," Emma said finally. "I think that would be good." The Judicial Review Board called an emergency meeting 3 days after the story broke. Judge Morgan sat alone at a long table, facing 7 serious colleagues. His usual confidence was gone. "The difference in treatment is clear, Judge Morgan," said Judge Wilson, the leader of the board. "We had outside experts check Ms. Bennett's findings. They are correct." Morgan nodded slowly. "I've been looking at my own records. I see the pattern now. The question is," Judge Wilson continued, "what should we do about it? Some people are calling for your removal from the bench." Morgan felt a chill run down his spine. Being a judge wasn't just his job, it was who he was. The thought of losing it made him feel empty inside. Outside the courthouse, the crowd of protesters had grown. Some were people who had been in Morgan's courtroom over the years. Others were community members angry about the unfairness. They held signs and chanted for equal justice. News vans lined the street. Reporters stopped people going in and out. of the building asking for comments about Judge Morgan and the investigation. Emma had given several interviews by now. In each one, she was careful to focus on the system, not just on one man. "This isn't about Judge Morgan being a bad person," she told BBC News. "It's about patterns that have become so normal that people don't even see them anymore." After the board meeting, Morgan walked back to his empty courtroom. All his cases had been reassigned to other judges while the review was happening. He sat in his chair and looked out at the empty seats. For 23 years he had sat in this spot, making decisions that changed people's lives. He had always believed he was being fair. How many people had he hurt without realizing it? His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Emma Bennett. "Still on for coffee tomorrow?" "Yes," he replied. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." The next morning, they met at a quiet cafe far from the courthouse. Morgan arrived first and chose a table in the back corner. When Emma walked in, heads turned. People recognized her from the news. She sat down across from him. For a moment, neither spoke. "Why did you agree to meet me?" Morgan finally asked, his voice softer than in court. Emma looked at him carefully. "Because real change doesn't happen without honest conversation." "I've been thinking about that parking ticket," Morgan said. $750 for you, $75 for the man after you. I didn't even notice what I was doing." "That's how bias works," Emma said. "It's invisible to the person who has it." They talked for 3 hours. Morgan didn't try to defend himself. Emma didn't attack him. Instead, they had an honest conversation about how people see things differently based on their experiences. "Grew up in a nice neighborhood," Morgan admitted. "I never had to worry about police or courts treating me unfairly. I never thought about how other people might see the system differently. My brother got 2 years in prison for something that should have been community service," Emma said. "That's when I started paying attention to the patterns." As they talked, something changed between them. They weren't judge and journalist anymore. They were just two people trying to understand each other. Before they left, Morgan asked, "What happens now?" "The board is deciding whether to remove me from the bench." Emma thought for a moment. "What do you think should happen?" "I don't know," Morgan said honestly. "Part of me thinks I should resign, but another part thinks maybe I could do more good by staying and trying to fix things." "Whatever happens," Emma said, "the most important thing is that the system changes, not just one person." The next day, Morgan met with his lawyer about the upcoming decision from the review board. His lawyer wanted him to fight, to defend his record. "We can question her methods," the lawyer suggested. "Attack her credibility." Morgan shook his head. "No, the numbers are clear. I was wrong." That night, Morgan sat in his study writing. He wasn't preparing a defense. Instead, he was making a list of changes that could help make the court system more fair. Blind review of cases before sentencing, regular checks for patterns in decisions. Training on hidden bias for all judges. As he worked, he felt something he hadn't felt since the story broke. Hope. Maybe this painful experience could lead to something better. Across town, Emma was also working late. She was writing a follow-up article about systems that help reduce bias in courts. Her phone rang. It was her brother James. "I saw you on the news," he said. "You're really making a difference, sis." "I hope so," Emma said. "It's not just about one judge. It's about changing how the whole system works." "Do you think it will change?" James asked. "I don't know," Emma admitted. "But for the first time, people are really talking about it. That's how change starts." 6 months later, Judge Morgan stood before a community meeting he had helped organize. The room was full of lawyers, community workers, former defendants, and one investigative journalist sitting quietly in the back row. "The facts don't lie," he began, "and neither can I anymore. What Mrs. Bennett uncovered wasn't just about fines or sentences. It was about who we think deserves mercy and who deserves punishment. I failed to give equal justice, but I'm committed to making things right." The review board had decided against removing Morgan from the bench. Instead, they required him to complete bias training and have his decisions reviewed regularly. Some people thought this wasn't enough punishment. Others believed it was better to have a judge who had learned from his mistakes than to simply replace him. Emma had written in her follow-up article, "Replacing one judge doesn't fix a broken system. Real change requires looking at the patterns that affect everyone." After the meeting, people gathered in small groups to talk. Morgan moved around the room, listening more than speaking. This was new for him, being quiet and hearing what others had to say. An older black woman approached him. "I was in your courtroom 3 years ago, speeding ticket. You fined me $300. Morgan felt his face grow warm with shame. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," she said firmly. "Be better. That's all any of us can do." Across the room, Emma was talking with a group of law students who had come to hear about the changes in the court system. Since her story came out, all judges in the county now had their sentencing patterns reviewed every month. Fines and sentences were becoming more equal across racial lines. "Your story changed everything," one student said. "Did you know it would have such an impact?" Emma smiled. "I hoped it would. But change only happens when people are ready to listen." Later that evening, Emma and Morgan ended up standing next to each other at the refreshment table. "How do you think it's going?" Emma asked, pouring herself some water. "Slowly," Morgan admitted. "Change is hard. Some of my colleagues still think this whole thing was blown out of proportion." "And what do you think?" Emma asked. Morgan looked at her directly. "I think you showed me something about myself that I needed to see. It wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary." Outside the community center, snow was beginning to fall. Emma's brother James was waiting to drive her home. He had been released from prison early as part of a review of sentencing that had started after Emma's investigation. "That's him, isn't it?" James asked, nodding toward Morgan, who was putting on his coat. "The judge your story was about?" "Yes," Emma said. "Is he as bad as I imagined?" Emma watched as Morgan held the door for an elderly couple, helping them navigate the snowy steps. "He's just a person who didn't see his own bias," she said. "Like most of us." As they drove home, James asked, "Do you think things will really change? Or will it all go back to how it was before once people forget about your story?" Emma looked out at the snow-covered streets. "Some things have already changed. The review system is working. The numbers show more equal treatment in the courts now." "But what about people's hearts?" James asked. "That's harder to change than rules." "Yes," Emma agreed. "But I saw Judge Morgan tonight really listening to people he would have dismissed before. That gives me hope." The next morning, Emma went to the courthouse to observe how things were working 6 months after her story. She sat in the back of Morgan's courtroom and watched as he handled several cases. A young white man stood before him for a traffic violation. Morgan listened carefully, then issued a fine of $200. Next came a black woman with almost the identical violation. Emma watched closely. Morgan looked at the case file, then at the woman. "Mrs. Taylor, based on the violation, the fine would be $200. Do you understand?" The woman nodded. The fine was fair, the same as the white man before her. After court, Morgan noticed Emma in the back row. He nodded to her as he left the bench. It wasn't friendship exactly. Too much had happened for that. But it was respect. Outside the courthouse, a light snow was still falling. Emma pulled her coat tighter and started walking toward the newspaper office. Her editor wanted to talk about her next investigation. As she walked, she thought about how one story had changed so many lives, including her own. It hadn't fixed everything. Bias still existed. The system still had problems. But it was better than before. Small steps toward justice were still steps worth taking. Emma looked up at the courthouse behind her, its stone columns standing strong against the winter sky. Then she turned and continued forward, already thinking about the next story that needed to be told.